The Women's Self-Help Podcast is a place where women can go to find support, information, and tools they need to take control of their own health. We discuss the needs of women so you can become your own self-help guru. From how to manage your stress, eating for effective weight loss, real talk on self-image, maintaining lifelong health, and healthy aging, we cover it all. Be sure to visit womenssshh.com for more information on everything discussed in today's episode.
Okay, so we dive in a little bit more into the shoulder and the interaction that back pain can have. Obviously, when we're talking about the shoulder, we're talking about the posterior chain and the trunk in particular, the thoracic spine. Can you just explain a little bit about the interaction between the shoulder and back pain and what that feels like when people experience that?
Yeah, for sure. So the best way to understand it is probably through the muscles. So in your mid-back, you've got your rhomboids, your middle traps, your lower part of your traps attaching through, and they attach from the back onto the shoulder blade. So you can imagine if you've got these muscles working excessively hard or probably spazzing them up in the other way because they're not working as efficient as they need to, then that's going to start to affect how your back's moving and possibly some stiffness through the back as well. And then you've got this big muscle called your lat, which attaches all the way down from your lower back, bit of the lower part of the middle back as well, and then goes and attaches onto your shoulder bone, your humerus. And that the lat is a big extensor of the elbow, which is trying to pull which is trying to pull your shoulder backwards. So the muscles that attach onto it, you can imagine if you're not using them the right way or recruiting the right way, you can start to get some sort of pain through your back. The other issue what we find is this is probably more so with the active person is they're doing a lot of overhead lifts and things of that nature. They start to round up a little bit and probably stiffen up a bit through the upper back, or they don't have enough strength in the shoulder and they don't have enough extension and mobility through their back. And then they start to compensate by really kind of arching out or kind of doing this like duck bum posture where they're really arching their lower back and start to lock up their lower back. So you can get some lower back pain as well. So not only upper back, but lower back pain because of shoulder-based movements.
And with the lower back and lower back pain as well, if you have too much stiffness or tightness in the upper back, that you mentioned happens with the active population a lot, is that when they sort of start to get a sway back and maybe the distribution of weight when they're lifting overhead is not quite optimal and that's when they get the lower back pain?
Yeah, it's typically a weight-based thing. Most people will have good postural awareness. Well, this is people who've been training for a little while, good postural awareness and good motor control with overhead movements. But with any overhead movement, or rather with any exercise, most people will have their breaking point where they'll go from having a nice sound technique to having some sort of compensation. So if we're talking, say, an overhead lift, taking a barbell or a dumbbell overhead and pressing it overhead, you obviously need a good amount of strength in your shoulder and your rotator cuff to help you move and help you stabilize overhead. And then you also need a good amount of extension in your upper back as well, because your upper back extends as you're pushing up overhead to create range of motion. So if you don't have enough extension in your upper back and you're trying to push through, you probably strain through, then you can find that the upper back really stiffens up and gets painful. Or what you'll do is you'll try and compensate and you'll try and really arch your lower back and start to lock up your lower back because you don't have enough thoracic mobility, or if you don't have enough strength in your core to kind of keep you fairly nice and still as you're pushing up overhead.
So if someone's doing an overhead squat movement, either with a bar or dumbbells or a plate, is it often then that they either don't have enough mobility in their thoracic spine or their core is just a little bit weak to balance that weight that will then cause them to lock up in the lower back there? Or is it, just that weight's too heavy?
Yeah, it might be one of those, or it might in some people be a combination of a few things. So it might be a combination of a bit of weakness in the shoulder, lack of range of motion, or rather mobility in the upper back. And then, it can be a bit of the lack of stability through their lumbar spine, through their pelvis as they're trying to, take that overhead, squat overhead.
And so obviously the shoulder forms, as we mentioned, part of the thoracic spine, which is connecting both upper and lower back as well. Sort of what would be your sort of advice, I suppose, to letting people know how they can keep their thoracic spine healthy or get that balance between the mobility and stability, which are words that get thrown around a lot in their thoracic spine?
Yeah, so I mean, the thoracic spine is typically a fairly stable joint because it's not one of a whole lot of movement. You've got your ribs attaching on either side, so it doesn't have a ton of movement as opposed to probably the lower back, where the lower back can kind of, move around and be a bit more pliable in some ways. What we find with the upper back with most people coming to the clinic is probably more a mobility issue, which is just possibly the person who works at a desk for 8 hours a day and then goes to the gym and does some overhead lifts. You can imagine they're quite rounded, they're lacking the extension, and then they're taking a movement which is an overhead lift or an overhead squat that requires a good degree of extension, and then they start to compensate in different areas, probably at the shoulder or possibly at the lower back, or maybe just even kind of jamming up their upper back as they're really trying to get it to extend when there isn't enough extension. So what I would say as a general rule of thumb, and this is more so prophylactically for most people, would be to just work on doing some extensions over a foam roller or a few foam towels rolled up, just to make sure you have good extension through your thoracic spine, and making sure that's, obviously it's got to be pain-free. If you're getting pain with that, then you might have a few other joints locking up here and there, and you might need to back off, or you might need to see someone about that to get that checked out.
And a lot of people, I think, are starting to kind of follow this concept of rolling out. And obviously foam rollers are really important. A lot of people do it before a training session, but maybe they don't understand exactly why they're doing it or the difference between mobilizing the joint and actually releasing the muscle fascia. So can you just explain a little bit about the difference between those two? And then also, when do you recommend doing it, before a session or after a session, or just when they can get it in?
I mean, in an ideal world, I would say try and do it before and after, but people are always rushing and moving around. So I think most people might have a little bit of time before a session where they can do it. And then most people at night time would be spending an hour in front of the television watching some sort of program like Married at First Sight or The Bachelor Pad, which is on these days.
That was going to be my example as well. Everyone seems to be watching those two at the moment.
Yeah, so if you're watching a show like that doesn't require too much mental concentration, I'd hope not, then you can take that foam roller and pop it on the floor in front of the telly, and you can multitask a little bit. You can maybe roll over. So if you're rolling for either, like you say, either to kind of knead out and get that kind of muscular neural change, or if you're trying to actually get some range of motion change as well through a certain joint. So you can roll out while you're watching that hours worth of program, and it's not taking away from your day. I think most people look at mobility exercises and foam rolling and go, oh crap, I've got to spend an extra 5-10 minutes here or there. But if you want to train like an athlete, you got to recover like an athlete as well, and you got to make sure that you're doing all the right things. And I guess if you're in front of a telly for an hour a night, and you're killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah, I think just some people don't necessarily understand the difference or why they're doing something. I mean, it's really important, like you said, to do that, to recover like an athlete as well. But some people just aren't sure when it comes to foam rolling. I think, from my experience, it's, really become a big thing since all the CrossFit that's now happening. And people are becoming more aware of how to manage their injuries, I suppose, as well. But if someone comes into the clinic to see you, what's your process when you're thinking about getting them to understand where the pain is coming from or the cause of their pain, if they're getting, some back pain in the upper back or the lower back that actually may be some kind of rotator cuff weakness?
Yeah, what I normally say with pain is I'll try and give them a rough idea as to why it might be overloading without getting too technical and too hell-bent on a mechanical way of why things are happening. Like I said, most people who come in with pain in their shoulder or their back have been putting it up for a few months. So you're not only going to have a pattern as to why it might have happened, but now you've got something happening within the back because the back's just grumpy in general. I guess in a nutshell, the best way to put pain is, and without deviating too much into pain science, is pain is your body's response to a threat or not being happy about something. So I'll focus my attention for them will be to let's get this calming down and let's start to then work on what movements might be irritating it. And then we'll start to work on, if it's someone doing CrossFit, we'll start to work on their overhead squat, whether it's a clean and jerk, whether it's a snatch, whether it's some sort of a push press and things of that nature. So it's just about trying to get it to relax, trying to get the back to mobilize and free up, and then try and building up strength around it as well. So does that answer your question, or have I kind of deviated a little bit?
Yeah, no, that definitely answers the question. And I mean, with people I see, I think people often think that they need to be stiff and, like you mentioned before, pull your shoulders back and stand up nice and upright when we're talking about posture. But some moves actually require you to be able to relax your upper back in order to perform the movement. So when we're talking about something like a front squat, for example, I can always tell the people that have trouble bringing their elbows high often have quite a lot of stiffness in their upper back. So what kind of things or exercises would you recommend someone do either before the class, or ideally before the class, for example, to kind of work on the connection there and being able to relax those muscles before they perform a lift or while they're lifting?
Yeah, for sure. I think it depends on what the actual class is, what movements are being addressed. But say, for example, it's a class that might have a bit more overhead work. They might start off by just doing some spiky ball through the front and the back of the shoulder just to kind of free up the muscles, working some extensions through a foam roller, and then just maybe rolling through the foam roller as well. So if you're rolling through, you're probably getting more so that kind of like a fascial neural input. So you can't roll out and knead out fascia. It's just really, really thick, hard, kind of like almost like 1,000 layers of spider webs together. I think it's physically impossible. They've done studies where, you try and knead out and stretch fascia. And I think you can't stretch fascia, but because everything in your body has a connection to pain and your nerves are your circuitry, they're pretty much well programmed. So you can start to get some sort of nice changes by getting all your nerves to be probably less sensitive and less wound up. And that's where the foam rolling might be having a really nice benefit before and after. It's just getting everything to relax and I guess chill out, for lack of a better word.
So people think that they're actually stretching the area when in fact they're actually just training this neural input or calming down their kind of pain response to whatever it is that they've just done that's either causing DOMS or kind of maybe disrupted an area of their body.
Yeah, it's a little bit, I would say it's definitely working to calm that down, and that's my opinion. We don't have enough evidence at the moment because foam rolling is so new. There probably isn't enough good quality evidence at the moment to show us what sort of connection that is. In terms of DOMS, that's just going into probably another topic, because with DOMS, you're going to have some tight muscle fibers just because you work them. Whether rolling is going to relax them, I think there will be some sort of relaxation because you have some neural input in there and that might get to calm down. But once again, not really sure as to the extent of it just because of the lack of evidence. But overall, it makes the body feel good. It gets you to relax and it's like getting a massage. So it's something that I recommend. It's not going to do you any harm so long as you're not bashing yourself with it, but it's likely to do you more good.
Well, what's your opinion then on, I've seen a little bit of research and heard a few people talk about doing foam rolling kind of after your workout or after a session where the body is quite hot and quite warm, and some of these kind of incidents where it can actually cause small micro tears because of the temperature of the muscle still. Do you think that's really a problem, or it's, for most people, it's fine to roll out after a class as well?
I think it's fine to roll out after a class. It's important to understand when you finish a class that your body is in that flight, fight kind of response, right? So you're producing a lot of adrenaline, your heart rate's pumping, it's going. So the first thing you want to do is actually just get the body to settle down. So what I get most people to do is probably go into a cycle of deep breathing for maybe about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how much time they have to give towards it, just to let the body calm down a little bit. And then once it's calming down a bit, you can then go on to something like rolling and working through that. In terms of the micro tearing, I haven't seen that paper itself, so it's tough for me to comment on that. But with exercise itself, you typically are going to get some sort of micro tearing at the muscle, kind of the lowest muscle cellular level anyways, and then the muscle kind of gets stronger and works through. So I don't see there being any issue with rolling afterwards. Maybe if that study was do you know if the study was talking about whether it was people rolling more firmly than others, or was it just predominantly based on time after training?
Predominantly based on the time after the training and still having kind of elevated temperature in the muscle.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that paper. It'd be good to have a read through that. But, I mean, it's probably, I guess, one paper, and they probably need to do a bit more work on that as well, I assume so. So, I mean, at the moment, just because of how things are going, I don't see that being an issue. I haven't had anyone come in telling me that after rolling they felt more sore, or if rolling has made them more sore. So it's typically fairly safe.
Yeah, I think it's like anything. You just take an individualized approach and see how you go with each client. Really, like if someone was presenting, and saying, "Oh, after we were rolling out after our session the other day, I was in a lot of pain," then obviously, you change it for them. But the majority of the people aren't having a problem. So yeah, I think you're right. It's just kind of looking into some more research that gets done, and also just taking it on a case by case basis as well.
Yeah, and it's also loading it into it as well. So, I mean, if you're someone who's never rolled in your entire life, it would be silly to just then go spend an hour on a roller straight after you work out, because yes, it might feel good, but then there's going to be a point where your muscles just want to kind of relax and not have to be kind of bashed and kneaded out. So I think you got to start off small, let your body adapt to it, and then you can start to build up the intensity and the endurance. And then you got to think about what kind of roller you're using. Are you using a smooth roller, or are you using a rumble roller? And, if you're using a rumble roller and you're feeling it's quite tough, then that makes sense, because the rumble roller is going to have a few little kind of big kind of trigger areas that it's pushing through. So you might want to start off with a smooth roller rather than a rumble roller, depending on your personal preference and tolerance.
And you can just explain to the listeners what you mean when you're talking about fascia, because I get a lot of questions about that actually, even here at the gym, understanding what the fascia actually is in the body, where we actually have it in the body too.
Yeah, I mean, fascia is everywhere. It is pretty much what sits probably under your skin, between your skin and your muscles, and it just wraps everything around, keeps it nice and tight and packed in. So it's just what we call just connective tissue. So in some ways, so it just kind of wraps around the entire body. It's your body's own kind of cling foil in some ways, just kind of wrapping and packing everything down.
Yes, I think I like to use the analogy. It's sort of like, glad wrap or cling wrap that's spread throughout your body. And it's getting like little knots, or you're kneading those knots out when you get really tight. They seem to understand it that way anyway.
There's probably not going to be much knotting up within the fascia, but there's obviously the underlying muscle that might be knotted up, or there might be the adhesion between the fascia and the muscle, where that's probably what you're working there as well. But like I said, you're probably just changing neural input, and when you're rolling through that seems the most plausible, I guess, theory at this current stage till the research and science catches up over the next few years.
And if someone comes to you with a shoulder injury where they're getting like a clicking noise or a grinding kind of sensation, they'll say to you, "Oh, it just feels like it's really grinding in my shoulder." What are you thinking there when they mention that to you?
I'll look into history a bit more. So with clicking, grinding, I mean, most people will have some sort of clicky shoulders, which might be just a bit of a tendon clicking over, or the shoulder just clicking itself. So, I mean, if it's clicking with pain, then that's something to probably be more aware of. If it's just clicking through, there's something not to be worried about at all. I would say don't really worry about it too much. You can have some sort of arthritic joint that really kind of clicks through. So really, I guess, degenerative joint that's kind of been through the ringer, and you've come in and it's just clicky and grindy and painful. That can be like an osteoarthritic joint. Or you can have a clicky joint, which might mean some sort of damage to your labrum, which is a structure that sits around the socket of your shoulder. And that damage typically is traumatic, with, like, you will see like someone who's had a pretty traumatic fall on their shoulder, or something's happened to their shoulder. It's pretty nasty. But it can happen sometimes through wear and tears, or depending on what sort of movement you subject your body to.
And so over the last couple of episodes, we've covered a lot in regards to the shoulder joint and its surrounding structures. What's the kind of top 3 things that you kind of give to someone in regards to keeping the shoulder healthy in the long term, whether they be either an athlete or into kind of more high intensity work or strength work, and then also just for the kind of general population who might not be doing as much physical activity, but just want to keep their shoulder healthy, so they can hang out with their kids?
Yeah, for sure. I think my top 3 tips would be, firstly, keep it strong. And then tip number 2 would be associated tip 1, which is work on your strength, but make sure you're loading correctly. So there's really good evidence that shows if you're loading more than roughly about 10 to 15% per week for someone who's training consistently, then you're likely to kind of put yourself at injury because you're not giving yourself enough time to recover, and there's going to be a few things happening around there. And then the third tip would be just to work on mobility. So you're working on all your strength work and you're getting strong, but you want to recover well as well. So work on, some spiky ball work, some foam rolling. It might be an occasional massage you might go for to do some recovery work. Keep your hydration, make sure your nutrition's right. So the third tip will definitely be recovery.
Awesome. Adrian, thanks so much for chatting to us over these last 3 episodes. It's been really great delving a little bit deeper into the shoulder structure and everything to do with the shoulders. It's really important, especially for the females that I work with here. I know a few have had shoulder-based injuries, and as we mentioned in the first episode, the older you get, it's quite common as well. If there's anyone who's been listening that they've decided that something we've spoken about has been happening to them and they want to get in touch with a physio, can you just remind everybody again where they can get in touch with you and how they can treat their shoulder?
Yeah, sure. So I'm located at iMove Physio in Miranda. So that is pretty much on the Kingsway, across the road from the Westfield if you live in the Sutherland Shire. You can find me in social media on Instagram. That's the only platform I'm using at the moment. So my Instagram handle is itsmyphysio.adrian, and you can find me on there. And I'm always posting up some cool stuff on recovery, exercises for different parts of the body, and so you can stay tuned on that. We also have 2 other clinics, so one in Panania and one in Roselle. So there's 2 other iMove clinics. So it's not myself, it's one of my colleagues, and we all kind of work through stuff and we're all educating each other. So best bet is to go on to www.iMovephysio.com.au and you can access either one of those 3 clinics depending on obviously what's closer to you.
And I strongly encourage all the listeners as well to really check out the iMove Physio, their Instagram handle, as well as Adrian's as well. Both the guys at the other clinics as well as Adrian post a lot of really valuable content on their page, especially in regards to what we've talked about today and in the previous episodes with the thoracic spine mobility. They give you a lot of great exercises. They've got videos and links there to other content that can really help you. So definitely check out their pages. It's awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Adrian.
Not a problem. My pleasure.